Hello, CFA candidates. I just want to take you through our strategy for getting through all the high priority questions in the CFA curriculum. So let's dive right in. Number one, before you begin attempting any assigned questions, make sure that you've made a set of summary notes for all the LOSs. Your notes will by far be the most important element of your preparation. It is the foundation from which you'll be able to answer most of the questions. And I circled the key word there, ladies and gentlemen. When you make summary notes, you build a foundation, because the act of making summary notes forces you to understand the material better. And the other advantage is you'll be able to retain that knowledge for a longer period, because a lot of candidates complain that, they forgot everything they read. Well, if you write it down, you'll get that extra muscle memory, and it'll be easier to recall the material later down the road. Number two, all the questions on this list are from the CFA curriculum, which is the exact source that the examiners will be using in formulating the exam questions. This is the easiest one, but a lot of candidates don't stick to this. A lot of candidates instead, concentrate on third-party Q banks, etc., etc. The CFA Institute has made it very clear. The exam questions will be based on curriculum material. So why not master the questions in the curriculum? And that's exactly what we do. However, not all the questions on the CFA curriculum are being assigned. So I'm sure you've come across some blue box examples or some questions that are just so long-winded. There's no way they can format that type of question for the exam. So for the hour that you would put in trying to attempt that question, you could have done 10 other questions, and that's exactly how you got to think. And I use a concept that's referred to as return on time. Just as when investors invest their capital, they want the highest return on investment, you got to do the same thing for your time. For every hour you invest, you got to ask yourself, where can I get the most points? And that's exactly the mentality we use. So let's continue. Instead, this list contains questions that have a high return on time. Our goal is to ensure that candidates get the most points for each hour invested in the practice questions. Now, how do I filter the questions that I think are high priority? So the questions on this list are either directly related to an LOS. That's my first criteria. So at the beginning of each chapter, they'll tell you what you need to know. So, for example, some chapters have tons of formulas, but if you look at the LOS, none of them ask you to compute or calculate. So why do you need to know the formula, right? Or why do you need to do questions that require you to compute those variables which are not required on an LOS? And again, you got to have that strategic thought process, right? It's a very difficult exam. There's a lot of material to go through. Now, the other criteria I use, and this I rely on my experience as an MBA prof in which I've constructed many exams. It's got to be bite-sized enough in which a similar question may appear on the exam. So that's what I was referring to as exam formatting. So you can't evaluate a whole set of financial statements on the exam. That's just not enough time. So I select questions which I think are bite-sized enough in which a similar question can appear on the exam. So this is how I choose the high priority questions from the CFA curriculum. Now, any in-chapter example or end-of-chapter question that is not on this list should not be attempted. These excluded questions are either not related to a specific LOS. Remember the example I told you? So you can have a question that requires heavy computation. Then you look at the LOS, it says describe or explain. You don't have to compute. Or the other types of questions I exclude are the ones that are too comprehensive to be tested on the CFA exam. So ladies and gentlemen, there's two ways you can approach this. You can sort of use your university thought process and do whatever you did in university, or you can approach this from a professional point of view. This is a professional exam. So you got to think along lines of return on time, stuff like that. It's not university where you got to attempt a whole list of questions indiscriminately. Like the example I gave you guys, you wouldn't just invest in any stock. So there's 10,000 stocks in there. How would you decide which ones to pick? You're not going to invest in all 10,000 stocks. you're going to pick the ones that's going to give you the highest return on your investment. It's the exact same thing here. There's thousands and thousands of questions. What, you're going to do all of them? Right? Even if you have time to do all of them, you can't retain all of them. So you got to pick and choose. Number 3, review your notes or LOS notes for a chapter and then attempt the examples and questions that are assigned on this list for that chapter. So let me give you an advanced peek. So the first chapter, it's right here, it's on page 2. The first chapter on our list is time value of money, it's quant. So what I recommend is first you review your notes on that chapter, and then you attempt these questions that I've assigned for that chapter. And then you move on to chapter 2, same thing. Review your notes for that chapter, and then you do the questions assigned for that chapter. So by doing the review and then questions right after, you make that connection. Because in the review, you have the concepts. And then when you do the questions, you apply those concepts. So everything comes together. Now, like I said, repeat the cycle on a chapter-by-chapter basis. Recommended, flag the examples and questions that you may want to revisit at a later date. Furthermore, in the event that a chapter does not have any assigned questions, you should still review your LOS notes for that particular chapter before moving on to the next one. So there might be like a handful, like maybe 3 or 4 chapters where there's no assigned questions, but you should still review your notes. But also important is the fact that you should flag a question if it's giving you a hard time. One standing rule we have in our prep, and this applies during the exam as well, and this is really important, pay close attention. Never, ever get stuck. It's like swimming. As soon as you stop swimming, you'll sink. So we never, ever stop. If I'm doing a question and I'm trying like for a minute and I'm still nothing's clicking, I flag it and I'll just move on to the next one. I never stop. Never, because that momentum is very important. So you always got to keep moving forward. And then later on, you can come back to that question. And of course, I'm your safety net. You can always send me your question. Okay. And it looks like I jumped ahead a little bit. Rule number 4, never get stuck. Go immediately to the solution if a question gives you difficulty. This will ensure you do not waste too much time on any one particular question, thus freeing you up to cover as many questions as possible. It's this notion of always keep moving forward. Just keep moving. Think about that swimming analogy. Tell yourself, if I stop swimming, I'm going to drown, because it's true. It's true. Candidates who stop and they say, I got to figure this out before I move on, it's over. Because that mentality, I know where it's going to lead that candidate. On the exam, they're going to fall for a trap. There's going to be at least a few questions that's going to bog that candidate down. And you can't fall for that trick. What counts is not whether you're able to get a practice question right the first time you attempt it, but whether you'll be able to get a similar question correct on the exam. And that's one thing I don't understand, ladies and gentlemen. Like, why would a candidate bash themselves over the head trying to get a question right the first time? They don't give prizes when you're doing practice questions on your own for the first time. The only day that counts is exam day. So move on. Now, number 5. To avoid burnout, make one weekday each week a non-CFA day. Every other day, though, be sure to attempt as many practice questions as possible. Every hour of prep is going to count. The average prep time should not be increased to at least 20 hours per week. So, we leave the practice questions in the final 8 to 10 weeks of our prep program, because you wanna have that bridge between the practice questions and the exam. We don't want to do practice questions 4 months before the exam, because everything will fade. So this is why we do it in the last 8 to 10 weeks. So during that 8 to 10 week period, the analogy is you're in playoff season. So every game now, every day counts for more. So maybe during the initial phase of your preparation, like starting 5 months before, 4 months before, 3 months before, maybe you can get by with 15 hours a week. But in this final phase, you got to up that to at least 20 hours per week. Let me put it to you this way. Those extra few hours per week now can save you from having to reinvest 350 hours again next time. That's the greatest deal ever. Sure, a couple of extra hours a week here can save me 300 hours or 350 plus down the road. I'm in. So that's the best insurance policy I've heard in a long time. Number 6, do not worry about speed or grade when attempting these practice questions. Both speed and grade will improve naturally as you attempt more questions. For now, your focus should just be on understanding the concepts that are underlying each question. Very important. Again, when you're doing that shadow boxing, for example, and what the analogy is, when you're shadow boxing, it's not the championship game. So it's okay. It's not a big deal when you're shadow boxing because you're still sort of practicing. So, it's more important to understand the underlying concept than to be clocking yourself for speed and marking yourself. It's too premature. It's too premature. 7, you're strongly encouraged not to use third-party Q banks. The CFA examiners will only be drawing questions from the curriculum, which is where the assigned questions below are from. Number 8, attempt the questions in the order of the readings that are presented below. Since the list starts off with more quant-heavy chapters, you may find progress to be relatively slow in the beginning. So that's expected because we start with quant. And, that requires computation, and so it'll bog you down a bit, so it's natural. Not to worry, just stay on course and do not be discouraged. Now, the other thing I'll say, ladies and gentlemen, is in the past, whenever I've seen a candidate with a rigid schedule, like in 3 days, I'm going to finish quants, and then for the next 3 days, I'm going to do econ, it never works. It is a disaster because each chapter is not the same. Like a quant chapter takes longer than, say, an ethics chapter, for example, even though each might be a chapter. So rather than having a schedule that says, I'm going to cover these topics during this week, here's what you should do. Just say, you know what? I got to put 20 hours this week. That's all I got to worry about. And then that pressure lifts, because then you just got to say, okay, I'm just going to put 20 hours a week, and however much I cover, I've done my job. Because I know from experience, if you put in 20 hours per week in this final phase, final 8 to 10 weeks, and the other thing is the final week, I'm going to recommend that you take that week off work, so it's going to be above 20 hours. So I know if you stick to that schedule in that final stage, you'll get through everything. So strongly recommend that. Now note, the examples and question numbers that are in red have PassMax solutions available, posted at the end of each chapter module on our website. So now you can see that for chapter 1, time value of money, I have solutions for all of them. And let me show you where you can find it. I'll just take you quickly to the website. So this is after you've logged in to your account. So there's time value of money. And if you go at the bottom, you'll see it says practice questions. So if you click that, it's right there. So here's those assigned questions. And you can see that I posted solutions. What's the difference between the book solutions and my solutions? I use a ground-up philosophy. So rather than just giving you some formula, I show you, step by step, how to get there so that you can do it on your own as well during the exam. So there it is, ladies and gentlemen. The one advice I'll give you, because I've been doing this for a very, very long time, the closer you stick to the game plan, the better your chances will be during the CFA exam. Thank you.